Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I definitely wanted to explain why nobody got early access to the RetroTINK 5X video, and for anybody who's not a supporter, I try my best for pretty much every video I do that's not the weeklies to release a day early for supporters, mostly just as a fun courtesy, but sometimes the amazing supporters find mistakes and stuff that I didn't find, so I'm able to kind of fix it last minute. That hasn't happened too much lately, but this last video I worked on up until the moment it was uploaded on YouTube and I hit premiere for later tonight. It almost was done the night before, but I wanted to do one more change, and then after that change in the morning, a whole bunch of like random zeros appeared in a couple of different scenes. That's happened to me before and I just kind of left them in, but that was so weird. I don't know. Then I was like, well, what else went wrong with this render then? So I fixed all that stuff, got the final version out, and then that was it. When everybody got the notification that it was premiering, that was like 10 minutes after it was uploaded. So, or I guess after I watched it after it was uploaded, so like an hour, but still no chance for early access. But I try to. That's something that's pretty important to me just for fun, just because I think it's neat. The only other scenario, of course, would be live streams. There's no way to do early access to that, but I think everybody kind of understood that one. But I do know there were a few people that were like, and not in a bad way, but they were just like, did I miss the early access? Did I not get a notification? But no, it was just me grinding it down to the very last minute to try to make that video as good as possible. And if you follow me on Twitter, you saw that I already found a couple of mistakes in it, aspect ratio thing, a video capture thing. So, you can never get it perfect, but I think that was pretty good for what it was. And I'll keep trying to get early access in the future for other videos. But anyway, enough of my rambling. Let's on to the Q&A, or I could do other rambling. So last week in the Q&As, I asked for all of your opinions on, do I keep long form stuff? Do I try to shorten it up? And pretty much unanimously, other than one or two people, all of the comments on all of the platforms said long form is good, but try and timestamp the questions. And I got mixed feelings about that. So I'm going to try it this week because, like I always say, I'll do whatever you all ask and I will try my best with it. But I have a lot of reservations. First, that's a lot of work. I mean, I assume that the right answer isn't to timestamp people's names, but the general summary of the question. But how would you do that for multiple questions? And I never mind when there's multiple questions in a post. And in fact, most often when there is, it's not somebody monopolizing the time of the Q&A. It's a couple of really quick questions that take a minute and a half, 2 minutes to answer. So it's no problem, but that's going to be real hard to keep track of. And the other side of that, too, is when I first started listening to long-form podcasts, it was really just a way to clear my head from, there's so many, I'm doing so much video game stuff. Let me throw on something completely different while I work just to, clear my brain of it. And I just kind of had it on as background noise. But I found myself very often, the favorite parts of the podcast weren't things I thought I would be interested in. So I'd kind of scroll through, the podcast people I like to listen to and choose the ones where they have guests that I thought might be interesting or whatever else. And if there were timestamps that said, story about a wizard on a corner, I would just, skip right by that. And I just kind of like the whole leave it on in the background and listen and kind of go from there. Unlike the weekly podcasts where I think about half the people listen to that audio only in their cars or on the subways or something, both as background noise and, I got to remember that one part this week is cool. The rest I don't really care about, which is awesome, by the way. But I think people that generally watch on YouTube click through and pick the topics that they would like to hear their opinions on with a little mix of both. So I kind of get that because the weekly roundups are things where, people are looking for advice on purchases, reviews on stuff. Whereas I always kind of felt the Q&A was more of a laid back, that's why I don't do a fancy intro or outro. I don't have music in these. This is just me hanging out with people that are gracious enough to support. So I'll give it a try this week, but I don't know if I'm going to like it. I don't know if it's going to be way too much work because these do take a really long time to record, edit, get up there, make sure there's no errors and stuff like that. I mean this respectfully, but I do think that people who haven't done stuff like this before kind of see an hour-long podcast and assume, all right, so it took like an hour and 15, right? More like 4 hours start to finish, sometimes more if there's a problem and I have to re-render. So I'm not complaining. I do love doing these. I just definitely wanted to give some insight on it, my thoughts on it, but I'm going to just do what you all ask for at least this week, see how I feel, and go from there. And also, if your question this week had to do with this, I'm going to skip over it respectfully because I just word vomited about it for 3 minutes. So no disrespect there if I skip over you. But let's jump into the rest of the questions and see what we got. Mr. Zarok had a very nice comment that I just wanted to address and kind of give my thoughts on. Hopefully it's not too boring, but the comment is, I don't support you so you could burn out. I want you to take time off. Having a guest host is not a bad thing. It gives me a different point of view. So first and foremost, thank you. It's a very nice thing to say. I did want to clarify, though, my whole being afraid to stop is not so much the supporters, because most people are as gracious and nice as your comment was there. It's the algorithm stuff. And in fact, the RetroTINK 5X video was doing really well in the algorithm. I uploaded a short, and then I uploaded the weekly podcast, and it has gone stagnant in views. So it's always working around this invisible enemy that you're trying to battle against. And while I'm not a YouTuber, I have to rely on that to spread the word about the website, to bring people in, to kind of get people hooked, and it's really playing the algorithms that's the problem. I agree that I actually think the guest hosts have all added, every one of them have added their own unique perspective and thoughts on stuff that I very much enjoyed hearing. Even when I didn't fully agree, I thought they were, there's only happened once or twice, but I still thought it was a really valid point, and I'm very glad that I got to hear them. So I do want to try to schedule stuff where there's more guest hosts coming in. I'm trying to make RetroRGB more of a collaboration. There's a lot of technical issues involved in that, though. And the bottom line, too, is a lot of stuff in the back end of the website is very ass backwards, to put it polite, which is 100% my fault and nobody else's. But if you all saw what it took to actually make this an audio-only podcast, you'd think I'm crazy, because I could just sign up for a new service, but then I got to import everything. Then I got to spend a day making sure that worked okay. And so, yeah, it's the chicken and the egg scenario, and it's always the snowball effect too. So I did, I wanted to read your comment, both because I wanted to thank you and everybody else who has that opinion, but I also wanted to explain that I'm not trying to hold that over people's heads, like, you support, so I need to work 7 days a week because you make me. Like, that's never been part of it. You've all been so wonderful to me, and I appreciate it so much. It's just the YouTube side of things is beyond terrible. Even the Google search results has been way better over the years than that. Even when I switched formats of the website, I didn't drop out in search results or in search result placement. All of that worked out really well. It's just YouTube that's a nightmare. And in fact, after I posted that short video, just to try it out, I had a bunch of people message me like, that was a really stupid idea. Your content doesn't line up with that. That's going to kill your algorithm placement because you're doing that. It would be different if you did a video a day, including a short as well, but that's not how I do things, and I should have known better or something. And the people that gave me the advice to do that also had equally as the amount of reasons on why I should do it, and no one really knows the answer. So I'm just still here kind of battling it. I know everybody's sick of hearing content creators whine about the algorithm and how it's out to get them personally, and everybody else does well. That's not it. It really is just a mathematical formula that we all got to figure out what to do. And if this was a video on something, the RetroTINK 5X was a video on something absolutely obscure, and it got 30-something thousand views, I'd be high-fiving myself. But this is a 100,000 view video. A lot of people in the retro gaming world want to see this, and I'm just battling to get the views out there. So if you see some paid promotions on Facebook or something, don't think I'm selling out too bad. I just want to get this video in front of people, because I think the first 6 minutes, everybody who is interested in the next-gen scaler should see, and anybody who's a retro gamer that wants to know why this is even different should watch the rest. But anyway, long, boring rant over. I should have just said thank you, Mr. Zarok, but I did want to give some behind-the-scenes feedback and hopefully not bore everybody to death. Daniel Adato wants to know, why can you use SMS carts on a Game Gear, but you can't use Game Gear carts on a Master System? It's a good question, and it's an easy answer. The color palette. That's pretty much it. Yes, there's a start button to map, but there's ways around that. You could map it to the pause button on the SMS, but that's why it can't be used on a Master System or on a Sega Genesis. Now, there's supposed ways to do on-the-fly color palette changing through an adapter. I'm not really sure. I've heard people talk about it, but I haven't seen one myself. So I don't really know if that's going to work or not. There's, of course, the possibility of some kind of adapter that runs through the 32X, but then you'd have to figure out a way to access Master System mode. There's really a bunch of complicated ways around it, which is why no one's really done it yet. So the simple answer is the color palette. The deeper answer is people are looking into ways to do fun stuff around it, but I honestly think that was a mistake on Sega's part. Because while having more colors might have sounded like really great marketing in the early 90s, the truth is, on that terrible Game Gear screen, you could have never really seen the added color palette. And having an adapter like that, I think, would have been a big seller. The Super Game Boy did pretty well. So I think that's something that people who especially owned a Sega Genesis probably would have really appreciated. So yeah, it's a weird one, but at least there's an easy answer for you. And also, Daniel wanted to suggest a gin and tonic made with Dingle Gin from Ireland and tonic from Fever Tree. I gotta try those. I'm not the biggest gin and tonic fans, but occasionally I'll get in the mood for one. And when you're in the mood for it, it's really enjoyable. I had my first, I was still not really drinking just to keep as healthy as possible because my immune system's still kind of shot. But I had Legend? Was that the... No, Suntory Toki whiskey on the rocks the other day, just a small glass, and it was delicious. So, hopefully I'll just start mixing it up again and trying new things as I get back into the swing of things. Jonathan Warren is having an issue with a modded Neo Geo. It looks to have the RGB bypass, audio fix, and a DFO to convert the refresh rate of the frequency of the signal to make it more compatible. And it looks like using HD Retrovision cables direct to certain devices work, but going through RetroTINK products do not. So I would guess that this is two problems. I'm assuming that you're using an AES because I never see this issue on MVS consoles. And if that's the case, it could be one of the mods was done wrong, and it could also be sync. Part of doing a proper RGB bypass is severing the connection between the C-Sync and the composite video sync lines, and then of course making sure that they each still have the proper components on it. Otherwise, you could be sending the wrong signal out of the DIN port on the back. And that would explain why they would work with HD Retrovision directly into, a TV, but not through a different scaler like the RetroTINK. So I have a RetroTINK 5X here that I tried with a known problematic AES, and it has the same sync issues. So we're working on a different type of fix for it to address just that. It's kind of combined with another thing that we're doing that involves composite video and all this other stuff. It's a little complicated to get into in this post. So I guess I would first just go over all of the mods that were done to that unit and make sure they were all done properly, make sure the components are all there correctly. And if that's still not the fix for it, flip it over and check to see what they did with the sync line. Is it severed? Is composite video and sync separate? Did they connect the two together without severing them? Basically going back to, was it modded properly? And the only other time I've run into this, somebody did a full RGB bypass, kind of like the one that I put on the website, where you basically you don't even use the CXA encoder at all. You just pull everything from the main outputs and then add the components, and that did fix it. So I guess I would just look into the mod first and go from there. It's so often the problem, and it's not even that the mod was done badly. It's just that, very often the modder gets in a console and the person says, I want this mod, and they don't realize there's more to it. Kind of the other reason why I always recommend going to experts with a lot of experience, because they wouldn't have even mentioned that to you. They would have just done the whole sync thing as part of the mod anyway. So once again, no insult to whoever did the mod. Could have been a mistake. They could have just been unaware, or they could have done the mod absolutely perfect, and there's something else going on here that we don't really know about. But hopefully I could at least steer you in the right direction. Patrick Martin wanted to talk about patching Mega Man 9 and 10 on the Wii for 480p support. I had shown that in a bunch of videos as being only 480i compatible, and kind of one of the reasons why you might want to use a really good downscaler like the RetroTINK 5X or the GBS control. And Patrick posted a link to the required hex modifications to patch your Mega Man 9 and 10 to run in 480p. So maybe 5 years ago, I remember having this discussion with somebody, and I think they even sent me the files, the WAD files, but I totally lost them, which is upsetting. And I think the discussion was also, if you set your Wii to 480i mode, it was possible to run in 240p as well, essentially having yourself a brand new old school Mega Man game. So I just kind of skimmed the post that you had up there, but if anybody has more info on that, please let me know, because I would love to find a way to host patches, maybe. Whatever's the legal way to do it, where you say you grab your own WAD file, rip it from your own Wii, whatever, and then run it through this patching program, and that way the patch itself would be legal, and you got to just find your own version of the game. But I would love to host something like that on the site, because those two games are very hard, and I don't know if I would ever beat them, but the few times I've played them, I did enjoy it very much, and it would have been really cool just to be in original 240p, or I guess even 480p downscaled to 240p through one of the other downscalers. It'd look a little better than the 480i downscaling. So if anybody's an expert in that, or if you were the person that talked to me 5 years ago that I stupidly forgot the files or lost the files, maybe chime in and we'll try to figure it out. Monty wants to know if I could clarify what the MiSTerCade does that the regular MiSTer setup, either with I/O board or pass-through with adapter, doesn't. I get the JAMA Edge connection for control hookup, and it must route the 12-volt power to the monitor, but is there more that's happening on the large MiSTerCade board? Thinking about typical superguns which convert from arcade to consumer, the MiSTerCade seems to be the other way around and converts consumer to arcade, but it's much bigger and complex than superguns seem to be, so I'm missing something. Is it all about simplifying plugging in a MiSTer to an existing arcade setup? Basically, yes. So the MiSTerCade is a combination of the I/O board, so that's what you would want anytime you have an analog setup, as well as a bunch of different options to route control in and button routing for the controls. So it's not just about mapping controls. It's about when you install this in an arcade machine, you have button 5 and 6 hookups, or sometimes button 6, depending on the arcade machine. You have different choices for output. On the prototype, you were able to also have a full I/O board setup on there as well, meaning you could go back and forth between just VGA out to your regular RGB monitor. I think the production version has changed that for JVS setups. But either way, it's a dual use thing. So I know you didn't say this, but I just wanted to bring up the point that it is absolutely worth every penny. It's not just a board with some voltage translators on there to get it up to the higher JAMA voltage. There's a lot of stuff that's little things that are implemented into that make life so much easier than taking a MiSTer, dealing with converting the video signal, and dealing with wiring in a custom USB controller to that. Now, if you have the ability to do all that, you could use your MiSTer and just swap it between your arcade machine and other things, but this is meant specifically for people that don't want to do that. Monty said they're asking in the context of thinking about a ground-up mini arcade setup inspired by my mini MVS. My mini MiSTerCade, thank you. They have some arcade monitors with a DB15 input. I guess a simplified method versus the older RGB HV pins, possibly. Could the MiSTer output straight to that, and with a ground up, could I use a simple USB transcoder or scavenge an old USB arcade stick? Yeah, absolutely. And if you have the ability to build things out of wood yourself, the tools are usually, just like with soldering, the biggest hurdle for that. But I would even consider taking something like a Vulix arcade stick, the giant, big, heavy ones. I love mine. Got mine from Arturo a couple years ago. You could have one of those. You could put in, you could wire it direct for DB15, and then you could get one of those. I believe Mick Guyver designed the DB15 to USB adapter. So you're all set there. And then just use the regular I/O board output of a MiSTer to go into anything that takes standard video signals, like a PVM, an RGB monitor, anything like that. And you could build yourself something that looks and feels like an arcade cabinet, but you're just using a basic MiSTer. And if you wanted to, you could pull that out and swap it between different things. So it's a very good idea, but for me personally, I cannot tell you how appreciative I am of being able to walk over to my mini MiSTerCade, flick on the power button, and 10 seconds later, I have any arcade game that's supported on MiSTer available to me. No unplugging and replugging, no setting stuff up, which is a real pet peeve for me because I wish I could, my camera's mounted, I wish I could show you all the boxes, but like part of the reason the RetroTINK 5X video took 60 hours to shoot, not including the script or all the research before that, was because every time I wanted another console, I had to move my makeshift desk, which is just stacks of plastic bins with a desk on top of it. Like I had to move that, I had to move something else, I had to unplug something, pull out a box, unpack everything, shoot the footage with that console, pack everything back up, put it away, grab the next console. So for me, the thought of being able to walk over, I actually keep mine unplugged. So walk over, unplug, turn on, and poof, MiSTer. That is invaluable to me, especially in my current setup. So with people that probably have full setups at home with their consoles, I'm sure that's a lot less of an issue. But yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts on it. And this is a good question, but hopefully I clarified both sides. Mark Main was looking for a recommendation for an automatic HDMI switch that supports 4K and HDR. So there's some issues with this recommendation. I've talked about this before, so I'll make it really quick. It's really hard to find good HDMI switches, and if you get the no-name brand ones, it's very common that they switch up the guts whenever there's a part shortage, and we are now living in a global part shortage. So even if we found a solid HDMI switch that does everything we all need, that works perfectly, there's a chance that as soon as stock runs out and they're replenished with more, that you'll get a box and a case that look identical with different guts in it that may or may not work the same way. So I can give you two recommendations. The first is a 4x2 matrix switch with also splits out audio. And I know that's not what you asked for, but if you were looking for a matrix switch, this supposedly supports everything. And it was recommended by Beast and tested by another friend of mine who said it seemed to work fine for them. So I think that would be a decent recommendation. The other one, Adamant, responded with a link to a 16:1 switch that says 4K 60, but I don't know if it says anything about HDR, 4K 120, or anything like that. So, I guess I would take a look at both, but I would just keep in mind that HDMI switches are not, you're probably not going to get the exact one that you want. And it's very frustrating because I've seen pro level stuff that's like $2,000, $3,000 that does everything we would want. And then I see stuff like these recommendations for, I think it was 130 for the 4x2, and I think it's 420 for the 16:1. Well, why can't we just have one that's like 12x2 and it's $500 that has a mix of both of those things? So I don't know. I'm very frustrated with HDMI switches. I still just have an HDMI cable laying on a shelf that I plug in a console one at a time whenever I want to play, which is not fun to do, but at least I never have to worry about weirdness like that. So I would check out those recommendations and see if they're right for you. If not, keep looking. And also, thank you for taking my stupid, silly joke the way I meant it. Just silly. Glad you weren't, no hard feelings there or anything. And yeah, your punctuation was fine this time. Blue Rigel 81 had a pretty good question that I've tried to respond to about 9 times in a row already, and there's been sirens and loud horns and backup alarms going off, so I think I just have to power through this one. My apologies for any alarms, but basically they just placed an order for a RetroTINK 5X, and they're going to a 32-inch 1080p LCD and want to clarify their current setup and where they could have upgrades and get the best out of their consoles. They have S-video cables for the Saturn and PS1, but they were considering getting RGB or HD Retrovision cables. It's my opinion that with those two consoles, you will notice a difference, but it's not going to be as big of a difference as Composite to S-video. So I would upgrade those as you have time later on. You'll definitely start to notice a difference when you get to the 1080p 5X scaling and optimal timing stuff if you're into all of that, but at the moment, it's still a good solution, as long as you're using quality S-video cables and not unshielded ones that have a bunch of composite interference or something. I would definitely do that, but that would not be my priority. My priority would be with the next part of your question, GameCube and Dreamcast. So the GameCube's kind of straightforward. You have a Carby, which outputs the native resolutions. I would set your Carby to pass through, so do not deinterlace anything. Just pass through every signal as it was the original. And then I would pick up a cheap HDMI to component converter. I list them in the Amazon store. I'll put the link here. There's two in the there's two in there. Either one, whichever one's in stock, just grab one. They're both the same guts and they perform the same for now. Who knows what's going to happen when they run out of stock. And the reason I suggest that is because you could, for the very few GameCube games that can't be forced to 480p, you could utilize the very good deinterlacing on the RetroTINK 5X. And on top of that, you could even do things like the line doubling to 960p, filling the screen for the 1080p fill mode for 480p stuff. There's some really good stuff that you could do with the GameCube that I think you'd appreciate, especially when you're talking about a $20 converter, and then pick up like a 1-foot shielded component video cable just to make sure, so you're talking $25. That's worth it in my, maybe not to everybody, but I truly think it would be, just to allow the different options that you would get from that, because also you're not letting your TV scale the image, you're letting the RetroTINK scale it. The only other thing that you mentioned was you have the Behar Brothers Akura, which is an HDMI out box that only outputs 480p, but does allow you to do the switch trick for the games that support it. And I like that box. I've always thought it was a good solution. I always thought it was the best cheap solution to get HDMI on your TV. It's not nearly as good as the DC Digital, and it's not as good as the RetroTINK, RetroTINK 5X, but there's nothing wrong with it. However, I do think that if you upgrade to one of the switchable SCART cables from Retro Access or Retro Gaming Cables, it's the one that actually has the switch built in to the console connector, so you could toggle between 480i and 480p. I think that opens up a world of possibilities for you. Whenever the HD Retrovision cable comes out, same thing. Who knows when that's coming out now with all the part shortages, though. But I think the advantage of that is the same as the GameCube, but you'd also be able to probably sell your Akura to pick up some of the cash back, if not all of it, from getting one of those other cables. And it's the same advantages of now you get to double for 480p if you would like to. Now you get to deinterlace any of the 480i only games on the Dreamcast that aren't compatible. I think there's only one or two, but whatever's not compatible. So I think that's probably the best for your setup. I would start with getting the HDMI converter, just because you could even use that with the Akura if you'd like. You don't have to sell it and get a SCART cable. You could just use the output of the Akura into that. I think for a temporary solution, that's cool, but I would look into selling the Akura and getting a SCART cable. And once again, no disrespect to the Behar Brothers or the Akura. I'm just talking about your setup personally. And then after that, so HDMI to component converter, then look into swapping the Akura out for something else, then maybe get other cables for the Saturn and PS1, just because there's a good solution now and you're not going to get as big of a jump as you would from the other stuff. So hopefully that made sense and I didn't end up confusing you with that. I try to be pretty clear, but I know this stuff could be a little wacky. And I'll just make sure to drop a link to that exact part of the Amazon store for anybody that wants those converters. Earth2Brux said they have a PC Engine and they're trying to get composite video on the cheap. Is it safe to go the do-it-yourself route and make your own cable that taps into the expansion port pins? I just don't want to damage my console or TV with some hack job when I know a good, although more expensive solution like the spark plug is out there. If you follow the guide and you make sure to add the capacitor to it, or I guess if you buy the cheap Hyperkin solution, cut it open, add a capacitor, and glue it back together, that should be fine. You just don't want to do what Hyperkin did and only connect the outputs. The chance of you causing problem with your TV or scaler is very low, but I just, as you said in your question here, I don't think it's a good to chance stuff like that. It's old equipment. We want to keep this stuff alive as long as we can, and we don't want to find out that you were the 1 in a million that blew out your TV because you didn't put a capacitor on the line. So totally fine to go the do-it-yourself route or to hack the Hyperkin one. I just would make sure that the correct components are in there, and I'm not sure where the links are to that, and I know they've even changed over the years, but just try to look up the correct spec for that. And same on the audio side too. You want to just be careful that you get the audio pulled correctly. So if you're just doing something that, if your plan is to eventually get the spark plug or the DB graphics booster or something else, I would just do whatever solution you got now, maybe put it on a breadboard or something and kind of hack it together, and just know that you're looking to upgrade in the future. But if you're really looking to build your own, I would kind of look into maybe how all of these devices work and try to go through and build your own copy of it. Now, I'm not telling you to clone those. It's just I know a lot of people, depending on where you live, where shipping, what shipping costs are for import costs and stuff like that, the fairly cheap spark plug could now suddenly become an incredibly expensive device. So I totally understand just wanting to grab a breadboard and some components and try to build it yourself. And it's fun, if you enjoy that stuff. But I think I would either try to do a really good job building the exact same circuits, or I would just do yourself a hack job knowing that you should want to upgrade at some point in the future to that stuff. Logan said they're interested in picking up some disc-based games for systems they don't currently own but plan to, like PS1, PS2, and Xbox. They were wondering if there is a way to verify if the discs are functional other than just a visual check. I have a PS3 Slim, so I was thinking I could check the PS1 games that way. If you're buying it from a game store, they should allow you to check them before leaving, at least a retro game store, not like a GameStop that has a bin of old games or anything. But other than that, yeah, just check, if it's got a big gouge down the middle of it, it's probably not going to work. And alternatively, too, a lot of games that have been cleaned have this weird look and texture to them where you think that's never going to work, and it works perfect. It's just the way the game was cleaned, kind of has a polish to it now. So I think the only way to really verify that is to check it. And you also got to realize that you could get halfway through a game and that's where the scratch is or something. And it's really just a crapshoot. But doing a good visual inspection will get you 90% of the way there. And making sure they actually boot should get you most of the rest of the way. You just got to, be realistic in that, older stuff, they're not going to last forever. And while I have not seen disc rot on official games, CDRs have definitely been dying left and right for years now. So at some point, original games are going to start rotting out. But, just do a visual inspection, and it's pretty much as good as you could ask for the short term. I'm not sure what we're going to do in the long run when these things start dying. I don't know if there's any way to do some extra verified check where you put it in a PC and it scans the whole disk, but I guess we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it. Curtis Singer said they're finishing their basement and have free reign on the AV side of things. They're wondering what the pros and cons are of building a PC to be my main modern gaming machine and hooking it up to the LG OLED versus getting an Xbox Series X. They like the continuity of saves being on Steam and the ability to squeeze higher quality out of PC tech, and they're not really sure what the downside is to using a 4K capable PC. The only concern they have is audio quality. I'm wondering if most PC games have the same audio options with surround sound that they do on the console versions. So I'm not an expert in this, although I do know quite a bit about PC gaming. I certainly wouldn't put myself in the same category as like Digital Foundry, but it would be my personal opinion that cost would make the decision for me. Do I already have a really badass PC that maybe just needs a newer GPU upgrade, or maybe just some more RAM, but it's already something that I need and use, and maybe I do something like split the output. So I have a little desk over in the corner with a monitor and a keyboard and mouse, and that's my main PC, but when I'm gaming, then I flip on the OLED and walk over to the couch. I think that would be my choice, but if you don't own anything yet, I think it would just come down to features versus cost. Would $500 for an Xbox Series X get you what you need? I'm pretty positive you're going to get better gaming performance for the $500 you'd spend on that than you would out of buying new parts for a PC. But how much more would you have to spend to get the performance you're looking for? And at what point does it cross a line of, yeah, this looks and sounds way better? So as far as the surround sound goes, I think that's a good question, but you would probably just have to check specs of games to verify that. Maybe pick your favorite games and look it up. But overall, what would I recommend versus, a console versus PC? Budget. That would be my only suggestion to think about. And if budget isn't an option, you just want $1 million or invested in GameStop at the right time or something, I guess I would just go all out for a crazy PC, just because you could do a lot with it that's not just gaming. Just want to remind you, though, if you're using an OLED TV for gaming, I think would be absolutely fine. But if you're actually using it to work on, I think you would have a serious concern of burn-in. Even just the toolbar for Windows or Mac or whatever, you would have to really be conscious of not leaving any desktop icons, having like a screensaver pop up every minute, something like that. But if you're just using it for gaming, or the scenario that I mentioned before, you have one monitor for work, and then when you're actually gaming, you only turn on the OLED, then I don't think you would have to worry about burn-in at all. I certainly never get it on my OLED TV, and mine's a 2016 version, so the newer ones are probably even better with that. But just kind of my thoughts on it really come down to price. Demo Carby wanted my thoughts on the 2 ongoing Super Nintendo 2-chip or 3-chip RGB bypasses. So basically, not the 1 chips. And a very quick overview, if you get the Junior or Mini Super Nintendo or any of the latest model fat ones, which actually have on the motherboard 1 chip dash a 1, 2, or 3, you'll get a much sharper video output than you would on any of the original ones, which have a lot of blurring in them. And there's speculation as to why. Could have been intentional, could have not, but it's not nearly as sharp. And there are 2 bypasses that have been discussed for the past 2-ish years that could get you different results. One of the bypasses has the potential to be perfect. And although I think it's only been tested on a few motherboard revisions, I believe it has the potential to be compatible with all of them. And it's an awesome mod. And I wanted so badly to test it. And I spoke to the person who was designing it. And the board that they sent me got lost in shipping for months. And then when it did arrive, I had some time free when they sent it. By the time it did arrive, all of my schedule filled up, and I have not had time to go back. And I don't even think I've ordered the rest of the parts from DigiKey. So I completely failed and dropped the ball. I probably could have had a video out about this 6 months ago. But I'm so sorry. I let everybody down on that one, which is weird because I love the Super Nintendo, and you would think that I would have jumped on it. But one of the boards is with me. I'll just order the parts on DigiKey as soon as I can, and hopefully we can get to testing that as soon as possible. Now, the other mod, I want to be clear about this because I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate for saying this, but from a nerd test research point of view, I think it's awesome. I think it's very cool that people took the time to go in and figure out how exactly to do the bypass this way, what the results are, and more importantly, why the results are starting to get the way they are doing it this other method. However, from just a user's point of view, I love Super Nintendo. I have an older, 2-3 chip model, whatever you want to call it. I want to bring it to my modder to improve the video quality. That mod's useless because it doesn't consistently look the same on every game. It's not only is it different per game, but you could get different results based on some of the models. It's a great research project, but I would not suggest people get that done just to do it, just as a user. Once again, if you love these nerd soldering projects and you want to go through and figure out how this works and why, it's amazing, but not just for the user side of things. You said you also noticed some discussions in the same topic, mentioning some models of the 2 chips having cleaner picture with S-video than RGB. There could be a bunch of different answers for that. The RGB output could be noisier on some of these models, but I think it's way more likely that people were using a crappy unshielded RGB cable and a very nice S-video cable, because that's happened consistently in the past. I could be wrong about that, though, because I did kind of write off certain models of the older ones when, if I saw 10 in a row with the same motherboard revision that looked like garbage in all outputs, it's like, am I really going to spend my time comparing S-video to RGB if they're both crap? So I kind of wrote those off. Maybe that's a thing, but I think more importantly, that new mod, the good mod that should be good for users as well, that's going to be the key for older Super Nintendos, and that could actually end up leading to a lot of other things that might be very cool. So we'll see. We'll see that when these things get implemented, and I'll try my best to get to that good one as soon as possible. And I'm sure a lot of people on that thread of me criticizing the other one are going to hate me for saying that and say I don't know what I'm talking about, but it's up to you who you want to listen to. But I think I have a pretty solid history of especially Super Nintendo mods, and I really don't think I have this one wrong. Hector Santana wants to know, can the Genesis stereo audio mod be done with an optical out? I don't believe there are any digital audio points at all on the Sega Genesis. I think if you needed digital audio, a MiSTer is probably the best way to go, or I guess maybe the analog consoles if you can get them. But all of the audio mods that I've seen all tap into the analog circuit, so I don't think that's even a possibility. Next, have I ever seen an optical audio mod for the GameCube? I know the Panasonic Q had optical, but I'm not sure if anyone has tried to copy that. Haven't seen much on Google. Yes, I know a bunch of people that did the optical audio mod. However, with the very cheap and easy HDMI plug-and-play connectors like the Carby and the Prism, I think people have just stopped doing that because, even if you do need optical audio, if you're going to use one of those devices anyway, you could get an HDMI breakout or an HDMI splitter that also has optical audio output. So while it should be possible, I really wouldn't recommend anybody do it with HDMI solutions available. And if your GameCube is one of the ones that doesn't have the digital output and you want to do one of these mods anyway, you're going to need to cut the case. So you might as well spend your time and your money doing the HDMI one to get you digital video and audio. Just my thoughts, though. If you completely disagree, that's totally cool. I would do some research on who's still doing those mods and if there's any boards that are even being built so that you could just do a board installation rather than have to make the boards, have them printed from OSH Park, add the components and all that stuff as well. Jerry had a question about using the SATA connectors for the Terra Onion mode. Has anyone done any speed differences between using an SSD versus a regular spinning hard drive? So the only difference that you would notice is copying files from your computer to the drive. So if you're going to copy the entire game library over and really only update whenever there's a new ROM hack or something, then it wouldn't really matter because you could just hit copy, walk away, come back in however long it takes, and that's it. If you're somebody like me that's constantly putting new stuff on there, that large difference in transfer speed will definitely add up. So it's something to consider. But to answer your direct question of is there any speed differences when using it on the console? No, I don't think it's possible to detect any speed difference between either. The only thing that I would add is while people seem to have had great luck with the Dreamcast, some people have reported power draw issues when using spinning hard drives on the Saturn itself, and some people have reported heat issues, but I can't really imagine there being much of a heat problem with that. But it's still something that I just wanted to mention. So if you were really curious, you could check out Terra Onion has a Discord. As with everything else, ask your question polite, you get a polite answer. Ask a rude question, you probably get a rude answer. But they've been very good over there. And you might be able to ask your exact model of Saturn and what people have been running into there. I know when I installed it in my friends, we used a USB SSD, so it was actually easy to just pop the top, pull that out for adding new games and stuff like that. But there's no wrong answer. It's basically just what's the best answer for your setup. SSD, USB, whatever. And I guess I would just check with your individual model just to make sure that people don't have any comments on that. I do prefer SSDs though, not just for the heat and the power draw, but I do think the amount of time it takes to transfer from your PC to the drive, if you're doing a lot of transfers, is definitely worth the speed difference. Rick Lewis wants to know what the difference is between using an upscaler like the FrameMeister or the RetroTINK 5X and a Linedoubler like the OSSC or the RetroTINK 2X. As someone that just wants sharp pixels, should I want an upscaler or Linedoubler? Does not matter at all. I mean that respectfully, obviously, but if you're just talking about video output and your devices are compatible, then you don't have anything to worry about. They're both going to look awesome. It's just about what resolution you want to scale to. The actual difference between something like a Linedoubler is the OSSC or the RetroTINK 2X, I'll start with the easy one, just doubles the original signal and spits out a 640 or a 720 by 480 image. So it's the same as the original, just doubled. And the way that the RetroTINK does it, I don't think I've had any TV compatibility issues. Some weird monitors didn't like it, but it's pretty much been the perfect device for TVs. The open source scan converter line doubles the same way, and in 480p mode, 2X, I've had pretty much the same compatibility as the RetroTINK, but line tripled, line quadrupled, and then 5 times. That's when TVs start to get weird because you're sending it its original refresh rate and its weird resolution just multiplied a bunch of different times. And that's why you have issues with certain TVs and capture cards not being compatible with the OSSC in all modes. A scaler And, you know, these terms are generalized and thrown around, so I'm just kind of going by the general terms. There's probably more of a technical answer, but I got your question, and I think most other people do. So in the context of your question, a scaler like the FrameMeister or the RetroTINK 5X buffers a few lines of signal at least, and allows the full image to be manipulated so that it's not just doubled or quadrupled or whatever else, but the final output is tweaked to guarantee that all TVs would be compatible or near all. I'm sure there's still going to be one or two that freak out every now and then, but I can't imagine that's going to be a common thing. So an upscaler doesn't just double the image or quadruple or whatever else. It doesn't just multiply it. It actually manipulates the image in a couple of other different ways for things like extra features, resolution switching. You know, I'm sure you saw that part of the video of the RetroTINK 5X, as well as compatibility. So the short answer, the line doublers or line multipliers just take the original signal and multiply it however many times it can without changing anything else about the signal, whereas scalers themselves can go in and have a lot more control over that image and do a lot of other different things. But the direct answer to your question, if you're just chasing sharp pixels, doesn't matter. Get whatever is compatible with your TV, or get the RetroTINK 5X if you want to be safe. Juan Rodriguez wanted to follow up on our conversation from last week about using the Atomos Ninja to record HDV versus HDMI. And it sounded like there was an issue with getting that HDMI signal normalized so that the Atomos Ninja could actually see it. I suggested trying to pick up a cheap SCART to HDMI box and using the HDMI pass-through, which is a terrible idea for most things except this. This is actually a pretty cool way to use this. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to work. They got a rolling image with bad vertical hold. Switching PAL or NTSC or 720p or 1080p on the SCART to HDMI didn't help at all. It just wasn't compatible. They had some success using an old Sewell 4x4 HDMI matrix switch, but it didn't quite send the right thing. So unfortunately then the only other thing that you could possibly do is pick up like a DVDO scaler, which if that doesn't work, I mean, I would be shocked if that didn't work, because the whole point of those are to take whatever signal you have coming in, manipulate it, normalize it, and send it out a perfect 1080p or 720p or whatever you set it to. So that's certainly an option. I'm so sorry that you wasted money on the SCART to HDMI thing, but I guarantee you're probably going to have that in your toolbox for another use at some point. When Jimmy Hoppa first gave me one, the joke was that I was supposed to smash it on camera with a sledgehammer, and I ended up using it a bunch of times for weird stuff like this. Just never for gaming, please. But but yeah, I mean, or even normalizing through capture cards and stuff like that. So I guess if this is a really important project to you, you could look into picking up a DVDO scaler like the VP50 or something like that, especially because it does a very good job with 480i, or you could just look into getting a different capture card that might be able to handle it. But sorry, my recommendation didn't work. It was very interesting to hear the troubleshooting steps, though. Jason Guffey's heard people talking about the potential of adding a smoothing filter to the RetroTINK 5X and wanted to know how an mClassic held up with this. I did absolutely test this. I only showed a few seconds of it in the video because the video was already too long and it mostly didn't do anything. But I do want to take a moment to explain what I meant by that, because of course the whole M-Cable army came after me as soon as I said that, like they always strangely do. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, Jason. I'm just telling the truth of what happened. But here's the thing. Whenever I've seen native 720p content, meaning stuff that's rendered in or close to 720p, like from the original Xbox and stuff like that, whenever I've seen that go through the mClassic, I thought the effect was very cool. Whether you like it or not is totally up to you. I actually did like it, and it doesn't add any lag, so it's totally safe to use. Now, when it comes to classic consoles, like 15 kilohertz, 240p, 480i stuff, I tried every output of the RetroTINK 5X, 480p, 720p, 1080p, everything, and it didn't do a damn thing with the mClassic. And it never really has, to be honest. I've never seen content that was originally 240p or 480i output any resolution to the M cable and have it do anything that I thought was worth the money, if anything at all. Now, it is completely compatible with the RetroTINK 5X, so you could repeat these things, and maybe there was something weird, maybe I did something wrong. I'm not sure how, because there's only 2 settings on it, but you never know. You're welcome to try it if you already have one, especially if you got a RetroTINK 5X. The only thing I didn't test, which people keep telling me to, and I apologize for not, is 480p native content from stuff like the GameCube. Stuff like that run through the RetroTINK and in through an M cable might look really good, but I haven't had a chance to test it. And I just think that it's mostly a waste of money unless your focus is really set on the 720p stuff. Now, once again, it doesn't add any lag, so it doesn't really matter. If you want to plug this in, even if you just tell yourself that it makes the image better and that $100 was worth it to you, then it's a win because it doesn't hurt the image. The only time I tell people don't use this is for those junky pound cables or the other knockoffs of those that just destroy the image and add a ton of lag to it. They look really great on still pictures, but as soon as there's movement on the screen, forget it. So that's the only time I say just, avoid those. And I don't tell people to avoid the mClassic. I do just try to give my honest opinion that with retro, it's pretty useless in my findings. Maybe there's a setup that I've never tested, some kind of scenario where you do things in a certain order where it does matter, but I don't think that the mClassic would be a substitute for the smoothing filter. The other thing too is, while I did appreciate the smoothing filter on the RetroTINK originals in a couple of different scenarios, 480i stuff, the only time it made a big difference to me, and just in my opinion once again, but the only time it made a very big difference was with the N64. And you still have options with that. The new Pixel FX scaler should have some smoothing options in it. Not the scaler, the internal N64. I keep calling it the scaler. The internal N64 digital should have some smoothing in it. That should be available by the time this comes out for pre-order. But also, I've always preferred the look of the 480p and the smoothing filter from the original RetroTINKs on the N64, which is so weird because everything else I play, I want super sharp pixels and I don't want any smoothing and I want to run it in as high a resolution as possible. But seeing those blocky N64 graphics suddenly get smoothed out, and then if your TV scales 480p, okay, mine does, a lot of people's don't, that's fine. Mine's not even expensive. What I used to do all these testing is at like a $200 TV, but I just really think the double smoothing, the smoothing of the filter and 480p to 4K using the panels scaler makes a really interesting look for the N64. And it's not the sharpest, you're scaling 480p analog, so there's a little bit of noise, but I just think if you're going for a smooth look, sticking with a plug-and-play solution like the RetroTINK Mini still comes with a S-Video cable, just doing something like that with a smoothing filter is really great. And I don't think if you're going for a smooth look, you necessarily would need the RetroTINK 5X anyway. I'm not defending it. I would have no problem saying that, I'm furious that feature's not in if I thought it was that important, but I really just think the only console really missing out is the N64, and if you still run it in 480p through the original Tinks, it's a really great thing. The only thing we don't suggest, which I guess Mike tested and I didn't get a chance to yet, is taking the original Tink with the smoothing filter and running it through the 5X. That's just you're kind of have a mix of all of the worst parts of sharp and soft scaling. So my honest opinion for that is stick with the RetroTINK Mini or the Rad2X if the smoothing filter on the N64 is really important to you. Or if you're the biggest N64 fan and you really want all the options, look to the N64 Digital, because that should have a lot of stuff. And that same team is known for doing great firmware updates as well. So even if it doesn't launch with good smoothing filters, maybe you can get one relatively soon. I certainly don't want to speak for them. I'm just kind of speculating based on their other projects. And they already have HQ2X on the PS1 Digital, so I can't imagine why it wouldn't be in the N64 Digital. Lastly, Jason said they've heard me mention a few times that I've been drinking some different teas while recovering. Any good ones worth recommending, health benefits, or just plain taste-wise? Tea drinkers are going to want to reach through the YouTube and strangle me for saying this, but I had a friend who got a doctor recommendation that elderberry syrup isn't a bad thing to add. It supposedly naturally boosts your immune system. Even if it doesn't, it probably doesn't hurt as long as you're not allergic to it, but it's very overpowering. So I have a box of teas that I liked but didn't love over the years that I just didn't want to throw out because I hate wasting stuff. And I've just been grabbing any tea bag in the morning, throwing in the elderberry syrup, and it all just tastes like elderberry with a little bit of tea in the background. It doesn't taste like any tea whatsoever. The only thing I've been making a conscious effort is decaf, because I just wanted to quit caffeine. I wasn't a big caffeine person, but I loved the taste of coffee, so I'd end up having 2 or 3 cups just because I think it tastes good, and I'd be jittered and just I don't want to be dependent on anything. I love beer, but I was never an alcoholic. I never, regardless of what Voltar tells you, I've never had a dependency on drugs or alcohol. And I did notice it was weird to stop drinking coffee, and I just don't want a dependency on it. I want to drink it when I feel like it, not because I have to anymore. So I think I just offended tea drinkers and coffee drinkers all in the same response. My apologies. But yeah, I just basically took all the teas that I've been going through, separated them into caffeinated or decaf. I would drink the caffeinated one I think I did a project the other day and I was sleepy, so I had a cup of that and I got to be nice and energetic and positive for it. But mostly it's just whatever decaf's in the pile mixed with the elderberry syrup. And you know what? Maybe this is snake oil and the syrup isn't doing a damn thing and I'm not helping anything. It tastes good, so I'm all right with it. Over on Floatplane, a few questions from Alborix. Do I know if it's possible to bypass the inherent lag of an HD CRT? So not all HD CRTs have lag. I have one right now. It's got an HDMI input, which is something people have told me no CRTs came with HDMI inputs. I've seen many, but I have one right now with an HDMI input that through all inputs is 0 lag in 480i, 480p, and 1080i modes. It does not process 240p correctly. It processes it as 480i, so it's not good for retro, and it does not work with 720p at all, but I purchased this TV to use with 480i and 480p, so it's actually perfect for me. In order to figure out the answer to your question, you would have to first find one of these, like the HD Sonys. I know a lot of them add lag to the signal. Samsung too, I believe. Could be wrong, but I think I remember testing those. You would have to then take a time sleuth and either plug it into the HDMI inputs, or if it didn't have an HDMI input, use HDMI to component converter and test it in the different resolutions, and then finally 1080i. And I don't know if it would reduce the lag at all. I don't think it could, because I think of the way the signal's processed, it's processing everything through it. But even if that were the case, even if for some reason you verified with the time sleuth and saw that 1080i was 0 lag and the rest of the modes were 2 frames, the only console that would be really good for would be PlayStation 2. Find a way to run all of their native 480i games in 1080i. It's still interlaced, but now you got the 0 lag version of that, and it should actually look pretty cool. But I don't know if converting any kind of progressive scan to 1080i would look good in that scenario. A lot of people insist that they've seen 1080i look great, and I just don't really buy that for video games. For TV and movies, sure. And for video games that were inherently 480i, sure. But I just can't see a 720p, a 480p, or a 240p game scaled to 1080i looking right. So it might be possible, but I don't even know if that's something you would want to do. And the HD CRTs have had pretty low lag, so just connecting your PS2 and letting it scale to 1080i might actually be a pretty cool look to it. I've only seen that once or twice, and I thought it was pretty neat. Also, you mentioned that some people have said that VGA inputs on older LCD TVs bypass the signal processing. I don't know if that's true. I've absolutely had people tell me that when using the VGA input of a PC monitor, it bypasses the lag, which is 100% false, and I've proved that a million times in a row. But it also can't bypass all of the signal processing because you need to send the panel in native resolution. So if that were the truth, and you were to plug in a VGA cable to an older LCD TV and send it 640 by 480, you would have a little window in the middle. It wouldn't be stretched. And I've never seen that. I've always seen it stretched, which means it's always going in and doing some of the scaling. So not sure where you heard that from, but if somebody has proof of that, please share it with me. I would certainly like to look into it, but I definitely don't think that, I think that might have been somebody mistaking something. There's definitely things like VGA inputs can handle certain signals that other ones don't. Like I had a plasma TV that accepted 800 by 600 over the VGA input, but not over any of the others, not composite or component video or HDMI. So that could have been it. But anyway, hopefully I had added some clarification for you on that. And of course, let me know if you want me to elaborate on any of that. Over on the YouTube supporter join service, Scotter140 had a couple of questions. It's kind of a long question, so I'm going to skip to the end. Nothing wrong with long questions, just in respect of people who's listening's time. The first is that they just got the manual otaku switch, and they said with one composite and one component RCA connection. They tried using the component jack as an input with SCART to the OSSC, and the OSSC didn't pick it up. So I wanted to make sure that you're getting your terminology correct. These are just connectors. They're not, the otaku switch isn't converting anything. It's just different connectors. So if you plug composite into the RCA jack and, like let's just say the yellow composite RCA jack, and then on the output side, you take that yellow jack and plug it into the composite video input of a TV, that should work fine. But if you got composite in on the RCA jacks, it's not going to be accepted on the OSSC because it doesn't really matter what format you send it or what connector you send it with. It doesn't accept composite video. Alternatively, if you're talking about component in on the RCA jacks and then just using the SCART connector to your OSSC, you would then still need to set the OSSC between RGB and component mode because even though it's the same SCART connector that you're reading it off of, it's a different signal. I think the latest firmware or the latest few firmwares of the OSSC have auto detect. But I just would want to make sure that that's the problem that you are running into. It is a bit confusing mixing signals and stuff like that, and you're going to have to just be mindful of this stuff and go through the growing pains of adding these things to your setup. So that's kind of what I think is going on, is the OSSC won't accept composite video at all. But please let me know if I got that one wrong. Secondly, it looked like their CRT with component video inputs worked with an Xbox 360, but couldn't get it to work with Wii via the HD Retrovision cable. They said they made sure it was set to output an SDTV to an SDTV and changed it from 480p to 480i, though I think the CRT should be able to handle both. No, I've seen many. In fact, most CRTs with component video inputs are 15 kilohertz only. I've seen one or two only accept 480p, but that was a really strange scenario involving a mix of pro equipment. So you could try putting your Wii into 480p mode and see if that changes it, or try making sure, try swapping aspect ratios from 4:3 to 16:9. But if it's working with an Xbox 360 with component out, but not the Wii, that doesn't make any sense. Whatever the signal the 360 should send, if you set your Wii to that signal, it should work fine. So I would double check the signal outputs and give that another try. Also, you said what's the best way to integrate all of this stuff into a CRT and a scaler? And the unfortunate truth is you might have to do a lot of manual switching. You might have to pick whichever is going to be your main setup and set everything up on that, and then have your secondary setup, you walk over and you connect one thing at a time. This isn't as big a deal if everything's component, everything's RGB, everything's composite, but when you have a mix of stuff like this, it gets weird and the solutions start to get expensive. So you could totally work it out, but you might have to set everything up to your CRT and only plug it into your flat panel when you want to do that, or vice versa, and kind of just worry about it that way. Because even you mentioned the PS3, what kind of outputs are you using? You're almost always going to have to switch between resolution output and signal output. So 1080p going to your flat panel, but then 480i or 480p through component going to your CRT. There's tons of stuff that are always going to be switched around. So you could do things like a mix of both, but you're going to run into trouble. So I would start your setup by connecting, everything to one and then the other one at a time, and kind of go through there and decide where you want to go. Maybe you're going to hate it, maybe that's good enough, or maybe you're going to start to migrate some of your cables over to different options, and it'll start to get easier to integrate to both at the same time. But either way, it just sounds like you're going to have to do some experimenting and kind of figure it out as you go. Well, that's it for this week. I took notes after each question, and now I'm going to go through and add timestamps and go through in the editing and make sure that all lines up. It's already added quite a bit of time to this, so I don't know with the editing involved if it's something I'd be able to keep up with every week, but I definitely wanted to give it a try just to see, and of course would like all of your feedback on that as well. All the stuff I talked about at the beginning, still relevant, of course. And also, if you're new to these Q&As, please ask any question you'd like wherever it is that you support. Just please pick the newest Q&A post. So at the moment, it's Floatplane, Patreon, and the Join, Subscribe YouTube service. Because the way these things work, I can't really go back and figure out what's a new or old question, and it's just the easiest way to go through, and it's kind of fun just scrolling through the questions and asking them in order like that. So please ask whatever you got there. I'll continue to try to improve these things. Maybe I'll finally get around to doing them live one day. That would definitely throw a wrench in the thing for the timestamps, but we'll figure this out. Hopefully I can improve these and get more people involved in them too, because they seem to be very low view counts. I do put these all up audio only as well, and hopefully I could integrate that into a podcast service, because I do feel like these are probably good enough or even better in some cases listening audio only. So I'm certainly not, shaming people for listening rather than watching on YouTube, but I just want to make sure that if I'm putting a lot more effort into these, that I try to get it out to a lot more people. But I don't know, maybe I'm just word vomiting and saying the wrong thing now. So I'm going to end it. Thank you all so much for all your support. Really appreciate it. It's what's keeping all of these projects alive, and I will see you next week.